Weather seems to be cooling off as we head into the rainy season, but the current fire weather forecast for Fremont and the Mission Hills is high fire danger. I spoke with Captain Corey Wilson of Fremont's fire department about this.
Anytime you have wildland that's mixed with the urban interface, like Ohlone College or Mission Peak, where you have the public access to the wildland area, you have that potential to have a vegetation fire or a wildland fire in that area.
Since Ohlone College and many homes in the Fremont area are nestled next to the Mission Hills, that creates a potential wildfire risk.
We have not had much rain this summer since the spring, so of course all of our light flashy fuels like grass are dried out and very easily ignited. So all it takes is one careless person or one accident to happen, and we could have a serious wildland fire here in the Mission Hills.
There is hope though, as there are many precautions to take in order to stay fire safe.
We currently have a fire prevention bureau to help assist Fremont residents keep their house wildland safe or as safe as possible. Things like having defensible space around your house, so not letting trees hang over your roof, not having dry, dead vegetation such as grass close to your house. So if you want 50 to 100 foot clearance around your house of dry vegetation, not mowing your lawn after 10 o'clock in the morning, because again it's hotter, drier, and it's easier for a rock to hit your mower blades and ignite the grass. So there's a lot of those simple things that you can do.
Wilson also warned that all residents of Fremont, regardless of how far they live from the Mission Hills, should also practice fire safety, since fires spread house to house and embers can blow up to a mile away. He urges all Fremont residents to visit the fire department site at fremont.gov to learn more about how to fire safe their home. In Fremont, I'm Eileen Street with Ohlone Network News. All right, we are here at the Falafel Corner restaurant in Fremont, and earlier tonight they hosted a watch debate party. Now, as you can tell around me, that most of the people have cleared out, have to get to work tomorrow, get their kids to school, but these four awesome locals here stuck around to talk with me about what they enjoyed about the debate and what they thought about it. So we'll start with Yosef first. Yosef, what made you come out to the event tonight? Why was this important to you?
Well, elections matter, and every vote counts, and we want to get out as much as people can vote out and make voices been heard. And we're looking at two candidates that decide, the fate of our country.
Thank you, Yosef. And Zoha, now, after watching the three debates, now that they've wrapped up, do you know who you're going to vote for, who and why, and if not, why not?
I'm actually undecided right now. I don't know who I'm going to go for. I'm definitely going to be voting for propositions, elected officials, but for candidates right now, I'm just not sure.
Okay. Well, I hope that in the next few weeks you will make up your mind. Thank you. And Anusha, with everything that you saw at the debate tonight, at the final debate, was there any topic that came up that particularly surprised you?
Nothing that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth is particularly surprising to me, honestly. But I would say the one topic is his stance on not conceding the election. I think, peaceful democracies are based on a peaceful transition of power, and he just wasn't willing to elaborate on his speak on rigged elections.
All right, thank you, Anusha. And lastly, we have Martha here. Thanks so much, Martha, for coming out to the debate watch party tonight. Watching the debate tonight, what was an issue that mattered to you most that the candidates spoke about?
Actually, comprehensive immigration mattered the most to me, probably. I was really appreciative that Hillary Clinton said she would do it in the first 100 days. I was disappointed that Donald Trump reiterated the wall. I was happy that they talked about issues, which they haven't done in the other two debates. I thought this was better because of that.
All right, well, thank you to the four of you for speaking with us at Ohlone Network News. Thank you to Falafel Corner as well for hosting us. And the event tonight was hosted by two great Bay Area nonprofits. One is called CARE, the Council on Islamic American Relations, and the second is the Afghan American Conference. So thank you so much to them. Yes, thank you. And thanks so much for having us. Back to you, Chris and Dina. With elections right around the corner, polls are being conducted left and right to predict who will win and which propositions will pass. All of the information can seem a bit confusing, but Ohlone statistics professor Jeff O'Donnell doesn't think it has to be that way.
It's actually fairly easy to understand in layman's terms.
O'Donnell said that first, one has to question how the poll was conducted. The most accurate polls consist of what's called a random sample, which is where every person in a population has an equal chance of being asked their opinion.
If you wanted to conduct a survey on Ohlane's campus and you wanted to randomly sample people, but you stood outside of the Smith Center, then you would only be able to talk to people who walked past the Smith Center. You would have no opportunity. There's lots of people that never walk past the Smith Center, so they have a 0% chance of being selected in your survey, so that would not end up being random.
O'Donnell also highlighted the importance of margin of error. For example, he explained there are over 11 million voters in California, but it is impossible to ask each of them how they will vote come Election Day, so a random sample is done to ask a smaller group, representative of California voters, how they will vote for, say, a certain proposition.
If we talk to 1,000 people and find out that 55% of them are in favor of this proposition, then the margin of error is a way of predicting how that group of 1,000 people can be used to predict what's going on for all 11 million.
Margin of error is usually shown as the acronym MOE and has a plus or minus sign next to a percentage point. So if 55% of the 1,000 voters polled said they would vote yes on a proposition, and statisticians found a margin of error of plus or minus 3 percentage points, then the poll predicts that come Election Day, anywhere between 47 and 58% of all 11 million voters will vote yes on that proposition surveyed.
Right, so the margin of error is always taking into account the fact that it isn't perfect and that we're using a small number of things to try to predict what's going to happen with a large number of things. That's why we need a margin of error. During an election year, you know, statistics is really fun.
Come November 8th, we will all know who won and which propositions passed. Until then, it's up to the polls. On the Ohlone campus in Fremont, I'm Eileen Street for Ohlone Network News. Polls around the country predicted that Clinton would win the election with an overwhelming majority.
The latest CBS News survey, it shows this, that a majority of likely voters believe Hillary Clinton will win the election. 55%, in fact, say they expect that.
Over 119 million U.S. voters turned out last night to tick off their ballot, and many also gathered at election parties in hopes of a celebration for their chosen candidate. Most local election watch parties consisted of Clinton supporters, which is expected given that most Bay Area voters are registered Democrats. However, there were a few GOP election parties, such as the one put on by the Marin County Republicans. I attended a Fremont election watch party hosted by Hillary Clinton Get Out the Vote volunteers. Clinton enthusiasts called voters in swing states right up until their polling places closed, and then it was party time.
I feel great energy. We've been making a lot of calls. We've been making calls. We started earlier on the East Coast and we moved over to the West Coast up until the evening time, right up until the time of the party actually, and I feel good about it.
It was time to relax a little after a long day of making phone calls, which started at 6 a.m. Volunteers also enjoyed delicious food and good company, and also celebrated their countless hours of volunteering before the results really started to pour in.
It's nice that we all can be here together and go through it together as a team.
But what started out as a positive and hopeful night for Clinton supporters slowly turned into one of waning hope.
It's going to be 2 or 3 states that we haven't heard about yet, so despite all the bad news, I'm still optimistic.
And while there were small victories, as the night went on, the results seemed to show this would be a clear win for Trump. So partygoers slowly started to leave to watch the rest of the night play out in the comfort of their own homes. By the end of the evening, it was a sad night for those still left.
So I just feel terrible that someone who's so racist, so sexist, so, just mean and unkind and a bully could possibly represent. It doesn't seem possible.
Well, as you can see behind me, The GOTV Hillary Clinton campaign has pretty much packed up. You know, people, the volunteers here are definitely feeling emotional and sad by what has come in with the results. So they've gone home in order to see how the rest of the election plays out. In Fremont, I'm Eileen Street for Ohlone Network News. Pretty much every national poll predicted Clinton would win, and when the results were in, many were totally blindsided. However, Ohlone College statistics professor Jeff O'Connell wasn't.
Was I totally surprised? No, I wasn't totally surprised. Was I surprised? Yes.
There are many speculations as to why the polls predicted differently than the outcome. O'Connell offered one possibility. He explained organizations that found states polling with a high chance of Clinton winning may have decided to concentrate their efforts in other states as the election grew near, since polling is very expensive and it made more sense to focus where the numbers appeared tighter. Thus,
once those efforts were pulled away, a lot of the undecideds started deciding, or maybe people started changing their vote, and a lot of those votes ended up going to Trump.
However, the polls weren't totally wrong.
So a couple of things to keep in mind about polls. They're not 100% accurate. And it looks like the final results on the popular vote are going to be about what the polls predicted. The polls were predicting that the race was going to be very close, and the popular vote is very close. So in that case, those things, I think, were very accurate within the margin of error.
So the ultimate question is, will polling now be conducted differently for future elections?
The way that we calculate, percentages and predictions is not going to change. But the way that we collect that information is always changing. That is the self-assessment that the polling community is always doing. How can we get the best data so that we can make predictions based on that?
And should we trust the polls moving forward?
There will be tons of effort put into making it better for next time. And should we trust the polls? The national polls were dead on. It was what happened in some of these states that ended up being wrong. And so, yes, I will continue to trust the polls, but always question where the data came from.
On the Ohlone campus in Fremont, I'm Eileen Street for Ohlone Network News.
Speaking of the polls, this isn't the first time this has happened. Some viewers may remember the 1948 election when polls showed that Republican candidate Thomas Dewey was set to clinch the presidential seat, overrunning mate Democrat Harry S. Truman. Back then, there wasn't real-time news or social media, so newspapers printed headlines the day before. The day after the election, President-elect Harry S. Truman laughed at the matter while celebrating his win.
Renunciar a la revolución, renunciar al socialismo.
Viva la revolución, or Long Live the Revolution, is a rallying cry often associated with Fidel Castro's long fight against American imperialism. I sat down with Ohlone College's Associate Professor of History, Dr. Kyle Livy, to learn more about the dynamic dictator that Dr. Livy described as complicated.
So he was simultaneously both a figure that rejected and inspired this rejection of Western intervention and American intervention in Latin America, which was very commonplace. But he also kind of appropriated a lot of the persona and style of Latin American dictators who were very much built into that sense of dependency on the West.
Given the tumultuous relationship between the U.S. and Cuba since Castro assumed power in 1959, some may wonder why anyone ever saw him as a hero.
Under Castro, Cuba developed a social welfare state that provided for the Cuban people in a way that is, thinking about life expectancy in Cuba. It's unrivaled in Latin America. There's all of these things that happened that I think there are some even in the United States that looked and said, why can't we accomplish this if we're such a wealthy nation, if such a poor nation can do this?
Dr. Livy further explained it's complicated to talk about positives and negatives under Castro's regime because some of the dictator's achievements were born out of his rigorous control of the nation and Cuban people.
He was a brutal dictator who suppressed opposition through violence, through intimidation, by jailing thousands of people who opposed him. Over Castro's rule, over 1 million people fled Cuba.
During Cuba's official 9 days of mourning following Castro's death, the U.S. Embassy in Havana did not lower its flag to half-staff, while the Cuban Embassy in Washington, D.C. did. So what does the former dictator's death mean for U.S. and Cuban relations going forward?
At least in the short term, that not as much will change even with the Trump administration in terms of our relationship with Cuba, because we have not taken some of the major steps of liberalization, including a full end to the embargo.
So ultimately, what does Fidel Castro's death mean within the larger context?
This moment is so important historically and so important in terms of symbolism, thinking about a potential transition, but not a whole lot has changed with his death. What will start to change, I think, is when Raul Castro leaves office. That's where we're going to see the potential for greater change in Cuba.
On the Ohlone campus in Fremont, I'm Eileen Street for Ohlone Network News.